Hey everyone, it's Justin with Voices for Voices. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the show. Thank you for watching and listening wherever you may be across the world. We are reaching now, which is really incredible, over 100 states, territories, provinces, countries, as well as 1,000 cities across the world. It's humbling to see those stats, uh, but we love what we do, and especially with today's guest. So we have a treat for you. So I'm going to get into announcing and explaining and introducing our guest to you from his bio on his press kit. So today, our guest is Dr. David Clarke. He is the president of the Association for the Treatment of Neuroplastic Symptoms, which the acronym is ATNS, and this is a 501c3 nonprofit that is dedicated to ending the chronic pain epidemic. Dr. Clarke holds an MD from the University of Connecticut School of Medicine. He's also a board certified in internal medicine and gastroenterology. His organization's mission is to advance the awareness, the diagnosis, and the treatment of stress-related and brain-generated medical conditions. He's the host of The Story Behind the Symptoms, and Dr. Clarke delves into origins of patients' unexplained symptoms. And we can learn more at symptomatic.me. That's symptomatic.me, M-E. And we want to welcome Dr. Clarke. And I guess to get things kick-started, what are neuroplastic symptoms and how do they differ from those caused by injury or disease?
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I appreciate your having me on and giving me the chance to share these ideas with your audience. Neuroplastic symptoms, as the name implies, neuro comes from the brain and nervous system, and plastic is actually quite hopeful because it refers to the capacity for change that the nervous system has. If we take a step back, most people, healthcare professionals included, to be honest, believe that pain and illness only come from organ disease or structural damage. But it turns out there's this whole other very large category of very real pain and illness that can put you in the hospital or go on for years or decades that's generated by the brain processing signals coming from the body, by the brain sending signals into the body. And it can cause symptoms from head to toe, migraines, dizziness, ringing in the ears, visual disturbances, trouble swallowing, pain in the spine, fibromyalgia, irritable bowel, many cases of long COVID and chronic fatigue, pain in the pelvis, the genitals, the joints, certain kinds of rashes. The list just goes on and on. The only common denominator is that my patients tend to have more than one symptom at a time, often in completely unrelated, unconnected areas of the body. But the good news is because of the plastic part, these brain circuits can change back to a healthy pattern with treatment. And people who've been ill for a very long time or very severely ill can get better sometimes very quickly. Sometimes it takes, years of treatment, but many people have been better in weeks or months. And what we look for is sources of stress in a person's life. It can happen to anybody. Stress, trauma, emotions, the long-term effects of having been through adversity as a child, which can be fairly subtle sometimes. Not everybody immediately recognizes the adversity that they went through. But it has to do with almost anything that you would never want for a child of your own. But other challenges in life can do this as well. And it can happen to anybody. The people who get this tend to be, in my practice, mentally stronger than average. These are not people who just, can't handle their stress. These are people that have a lot of stress. They're just not fully appreciating what they're dealing with. So it's kind of a long-term, a long-winded definition, but it affects 25% of the adult population. So it's twice as many people as have diabetes. And it's 40% of everybody who goes to see a primary care doctor. So it's tens of millions of people in the United States alone. So we absolutely, and this is why my nonprofit exists, need to address this, teach healthcare professionals how to diagnose and treat this, and we can just absolutely transform the outcomes in this condition.
Great. What made you want to either, I guess, look into this? Was this, there are these topics, did they just come naturally through your practice where you started to kind of think to yourself, okay, there's a little bit more to this. Maybe there are alternative methods or ways of looking at this or these symptoms and these uh, health challenges.
Yeah, I was very traditionally trained Western medical doctor. I went through 7 years of formal education, never heard a word about any of this. So I had to be dragged into it. It had to be proved to me that this was real, that people actually could become severely ill or in pain because of brain to body connections. Because nobody had taught me this. But what happened was in my 8th year of formal training, I encountered a patient. I didn't know the first thing about diagnosing or treating, which, when you get to year 8, you've kind of learned a lot by that point. The last thing I expected was to run into a patient where I was just like, what is wrong with this person? Because she had a severe gastrointestinal condition. I was training to be a specialist in those diseases. She was moving her bowels once a month on average for 2 years. She was taking 4 different laxatives at double the recommended doses every day, wasn't working. And she was sent to us from another university because they couldn't figure out what was wrong. We did some specialized testing. I was at UCLA at the time. And my department chair and I, we were convinced this special test was going to show the problem because as far as we knew, there was no other explanation possible. But that test was normal also, which we were at a loss. And it was left to me to do her exit interview and just say, look, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to live with this. We got nothing else we can do. And my neuroplastic patients have heard that, over and over again, sometimes, for many, many years. But we kept talking for a while. And at some point, she trusted me enough to share that she had been severely abused as a girl. And this had stopped happening 25 years in the past. So as far as I was concerned, it was not likely that it would be contributing to this very severe condition that she'd had for 2 years. So she's 37. She's had it since she was 35. The child abuse stopped when she was 12. So it really didn't seem likely to be a connection. But it gave me a reason to send her off to see a psychiatrist that I knew, Harriet Kaplan, who was certified in medicine as well and had an interest in these brain to body conditions. And I thought, maybe Harriet can help this patient live with her condition a little better. So I forgot all about her until 3 months later, I run into Harriet in an elevator. And this was the elevator ride that changed my career because by the time we got to the floor I was getting off at, she told me she had cured this patient with, 10 weekly counseling sessions. And that just blew my mind. The idea that you could alleviate a serious physical condition just by talking to somebody in the right way and knowing what to look for. Nobody had ever mentioned that was even possible. But I thought, okay, Harriet did this, and I should, if I want to be a complete doctor, I should learn a little bit about how to do this. It might come in handy once in a while. Well, I'm giving you a long-winded answer, but
Hmm.
what ended up happening was I learned the framework from her. I started using it whenever my patients did not have anything wrong on their diagnostic tests, and it turned into 5 or 6 patients a week. for the next
Oh,
25, 30 years, and over 7,000 people at this point. And I kept going with it because nobody else in Portland, Oregon, where I'm based, was doing this work, and because people were getting better. People that, the rest of the healthcare system had failed to help. And when I used this framework, which, I learned more and more as I went on and got better and better at it, they got better. And some of these people were very severely ill. If I can share one more story, uh,
please.
the there was a patient that really led me to believe I was onto something, truly onto something. And this was a woman who tried to kick me out of the room when I went to see her. She'd been hospitalized for an attack of severe dizziness and vomiting. And so I went to see her the next morning. I was consulted, and she said, doctor, don't waste your time with me. You'd be better off seeing your other patients. And I said, what makes you say that? And it turned out she had good reason because she had been hospitalized for this same kind of attack 60 times over the previous 15 years at a prestigious university where they really know what they were doing. But she saw a dozen specialists there. They didn't know what was causing the attacks. And then they got so frustrated they had her see a psychiatrist. And he said, nope, she's mentally healthy, no problems there. Keep looking for a physical cause. But again, I'll try to wind this down for you
Mhm.
here. It turned out all of her attacks were connected to direct or indirect interactions with her abusive mother, who had been verbally and emotionally abusing her since she was 3 years old. And as soon as she saw this connection, which was undeniable once we found it, I can still remember she looked up at the ceiling and said, "Oh my God, I can't believe it." And in her case, she was cured on the spot. She was out of the hospital the next morning. She called me a year later to say she'd had no further attacks. And when I cured that patient on the spot, which, I don't always do it on the spot like that. It can take a while sometimes, but even the people that take a while, they're on a pathway of improvement. But this patient that, Stanford's finest couldn't figure out, I knew I was onto something, and I just carried on from there. And now I, run the nonprofit. I give lectures all over North America and Europe. I've co-produced 3 documentary films. I've written several books. My first book is called "They Can't Find Anything Wrong." I should remember to mention that.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and it's just been incredibly rewarding work. I can say that.
No, it's fantastic because I was just going to ask, what made you get into the line of work that you're in, and it sounds like it was a progression, and then you hit this point in time where looking at things a little bit non-traditionally and how stress affects I'll say all the parts of the body, but a lot of things that we wouldn't necessarily think that like, oh, that's because of this other thing. It's not because of stress or we've had things. For myself personally, going through the psychiatric care for the last 8 years, I found that I was holding in my mind, I think it was around 138 different things that I just never, to your point earlier, I never talked to anybody about it. I just kept putting it back in my mind and thought I could just suppress it. And then there was a time where in 2017 I couldn't suppress it anymore. And if it wasn't for just that talk therapy and talking to professionals and not trying to figure out all the answers myself, like, oh, I can figure this out. I can just Google and it'll take me, and then I'll take magnesium and all these things, all these rabbit holes I went down, and I'm very grateful because I think it is because of people like you and the work that you do that even though that we're in Ohio and you're in Oregon, that people talk, and you've put together podcasts, you put together books, you put together a nonprofit, and uh, that's just a really almost like a miracle, like when you went into that patient's room and you were able to cure her on the spot and her 16 or so or 60 visits to for the same kind of symptoms and how rewarding that is. So I guess from an emotional standpoint, how does it make you feel when those types of uh, I say those types of actions, but like when you're helping somebody, because we have to make a conscious decision, like, okay, we do things for ourselves, we have to make money to pay the bills, and from like a basic Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but when it gets down to it, having an emotional tie to what you're doing, I think is helpful. I've learned myself and why Voices for Voices exists that I had to find something that I was emotionally tied to as well as paying the bills. I know I just kind of threw a lot out there, but if you want to just jump in,
Yeah, it is very rewarding work to have someone who has been looking for answers for years, even decades. My personal record patient had unexplained abdominal pain for 79 years, and
oh,
that patient was successfully treated as well. You know, she was a pediatric nurse, so she had lots of access to healthcare and to diagnostic tests and she had given up. You know, she had had every test you can think of more than once and had just stopped going to doctors and just lived with it. But her son, her youngest son, was not giving up, and he brought her in to see me, and we started talking. And she had been through a trauma when she was 8 years old, and she was still carrying the effects of that trauma at age 87. But we were able to bring that into conscious awareness and help her to cope with it. And her symptoms just started melting away after that. I mean, it was tremendous personally. You know, that's why physicians go into this work is because we want to help people. And unfortunately, with 40% of primary care patients having neuroplastic conditions and most physicians not being taught what to do about it, it ends up being really frustrating and frankly contributing to burnout for many doctors. But the doctors who have taken the training on symptomatic.me, we have training courses for people, both medical and mental health, and the public can take those as well because we've kept the jargon out of them, so they're very straightforward to learn from. But you know, there are doctors who've come up to me. One of them in particular, I remember at a conference and said, "You know, I took your course. I started using it in my practice. My colleagues in my group have been using it, and it's just transformed what we do." And for me, she said, it's put the joy back into my work because she was, you know, finding it frustrating to be in primary care in, you know, the 21st century. But being able to help patients that had previously made her just beat her head against the wall, she loved it.
yeah, that is that I can just imagine the feeling in your body and your mind when those positive outcomes come, and whether it's a traditional or non-traditional way of thinking about things. Can you maybe go through? You talked a little bit about the different traumas with some of the patients, but can you just talk a little bit about how anxiety and stress, some of the non-traditional ways it, it can affect the body where you can say, oh, I'm just having a cold or I'm having a stomach ache and it'll go away in a couple days or how because that was one thing I thought myself was, well, this isn't a product of stress or anxiety, it's allergies or it's came up with anything in the book.
Yeah, it's an approach that applies to people with chronic symptoms, which means, you know, going on for longer than 2 or 3 months. And it's also important to have a medical evaluation to make sure there's not an organ disease or structural damage that's responsible. But when you walk into a primary care doctor's office and you've got a new symptom, even before they do the test, you've got a 40% chance that it's neuroplastic. And then once they do all the diagnostic tests that make sure there's not disease or structural damage, then if they don't find anything, the chances of it being neuroplastic is going up, above 90%. And that's when we advocate starting to look into the person's life for stresses past and present. So, could there be something in your life right now that is going, maybe up and down along with the symptoms? So the stress goes up and the symptoms go up. That's a strong clue that you've got a neuroplastic condition. Was there a significant difficulty in your life at the time the symptoms began? A trauma, for example. Colleague of mine in Tucson tells a story about a patient who'd been having all these symptoms going from doctor to doctor for 6 months, and nobody found out until he did that right before her symptoms began, she had been a hostage during the robbery of a store, and for 40 minutes she had a handgun pointed at her neck, and she was having several post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms along with her physical symptoms. So there was no question about what had caused her condition. So we look for that. Depression is another one. Many people who suffer from depression don't necessarily feel particularly depressed. It can manifest in their body rather than in a sense of, oh, I'm depressed. So I ask people, do you feel depressed? Most doctors will. And many of my patients say, no, not really. I mean, I'm frustrated. I'm exasperated. I'm stressed out. I'm very anxious for you to find out what is causing my physical symptom, whatever it is. But no, I'm not depressed. But they're not sleeping well. Their energy level is down. Their appetite is off. They are crying for no obvious reason. They have lost interest in doing things they used to love to do. The meaning in their life seems to have gone out. Those are all classic symptoms of depression. And many of my patients who are coming to me for a physical symptom, they have all of those things. And so I treat them for depression, and their physical symptoms will respond to that. Anxiety is another one. The clue there that's most common is that the physical symptoms that they're coming to me about are more severe or more frequent when they are away from an environment that's safe for them. So let's say that home is safe for you. It isn't always for people, obviously, but let's say that your home is safe. Many of my patients, they go away from home. That's when their symptoms start to kick in. And when you see something like that, it's a strong clue that you've got an anxiety disorder. Another patient of mine, 16-year-old girl, severe diarrhea. On her bad days, she was putting herself on Imodium tablets, which is an anti-diarrheal, up to a dozen by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, which is way more than you're supposed to take. She restricted her diet to water only on those bad days. And none of the other doctors could figure out why she was having this. But I was the one who asked her, to get the exact story of when this was happening. And it was happening only on Tuesdays and Thursdays. On the weekends, she was fine. She could eat a regular diet. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, really not too much going on those days either. Your large intestine, where the diarrhea comes from, does not know what day of the week it is, right? I mean, it's dark in there. We have to bring our own light to see what's going on. Only your brain knows what day of the week it is. So the brain had to be involved in her case. And what does she do that causes anxiety on Tuesdays and Thursdays as a 16-year-old high school student? Well, it turned out to be varsity soccer. And she was very anxious about how she was going to perform in competition. The games always took place on Tuesdays and Thursdays. If there happened not to be a game that on one of those days, like say Thursday, it was just practice, she'd be fine. It was only the games. It was anxiety creating that symptom. So these are some of the things I look for. But the most common actually is the one I haven't mentioned yet, which is stress when you were a kid. Experiences you had that like I said, you would never want for a child of your own. Imagine a child you love, they're in the same environment you were in when you were a kid growing up, and you are just a butterfly on the wall having to watch that kid that you love try to cope with everything that was going on. Are you going to see anything that is going to make you sad or angry? And if you are, we need to get into a discussion about that. It can have long-term impacts that we can address, and maybe we can talk about what some of those are later. But that's a very important category, and it doesn't have to be abuse like my very first patient suffered. It can be much more subtle. It can be trying to have your kid repress their emotions. It can be being made to feel like a second-rate person or a person who's not measuring up. And you can carry that with you as a basic assumption that, I'm a human being who is not good enough. And people can carry that into their adult years. And that's highly stressful.
Yeah, and that last point, definitely for me, I carried that with me with my sibling, my sister, of feeling that she was perfect, 4.0, four job offers right out of college, right out of college. And here I am just kind of getting by, and nobody said I was second rate. Nobody, my parents never said that, but I had it in my mind that I'm not. I'm not measuring up to what my sister is doing, and so whenever I would do something that I felt like was a good, I would always rush home and show my mom and dad, like, look what I did, because most of the time it was just average work, average projects, and that is so true that I'm 44 and I'm still carrying a little bit of that, even though my sister never said it, my mom, my dad, nobody ever told me that. It was just this assumption that was in my mind. And it's incredible that those types of things are still in the mind, and we don't think about. We just think of, at least I think, like, big things of, like you said, structural and organ diseases and things like that, automatically like going, oh, I have this disease, I have this, and and a lot of it is in my head. It's not people telling me. It's just how I feel. So I completely understand. I'm grateful you brought that up because again, that's one of the things that definitely hits home, and I've been working through with my counselor. And that's not the only thing, but it's one thing that I guess I feel better that I'm not the only one, that it's something that unfortunately that happens to others, and that it's okay, and we don't have to feel shame because of these activities that either actually happen or whether they're just perceived.
Yeah, and when they're perceived at such a young age, when you're trying to figure out, who am I? What am I good at? What am I not good at? You can absorb those ideas as a basic assumption about who you are. And none of us has a parallel life to compare ourselves with. So when you put that assumption inside yourself, it just feels like it belongs there, and you can carry it with you for a very long period of time. But there are good ways to turn that around. Before I get into that, I should mention that any
Mhm.
of your viewers who are curious about whether these ideas apply to their own physical symptoms, we've got a 12-question self-assessment quiz on symptomatic.me. Takes less than 3 minutes, and will give people a lot of insight into whether these concepts are relevant for them. But in terms of turning around that assumption, when people imagine a child that they love growing up in the same environment they did, it can give them a much more accurate perspective on the magnitude of the burden that they were dealing with. Many of my patients, the analogy I make is as if they were parachuted into a dangerous jungle as a toddler. And, even though it wasn't for you, a difficult or traumatic kind of jungle, it was still a jungle for you to try to cope with that situation, especially as a young kid. And I try to have my patients give themselves some credit. If you parachuted into a jungle as a toddler and you made your way out of that, you know, give yourself a big hug for having accomplished that. Certainly, if you had a kid that you love in that environment and you watched them for a week and they came out of the environment at the end of that week, you'd give them a big hug. You'd tell them, hey, great job. You dealt with that situation tremendously well, and I'm so proud of you. And that's after just a week, you'd be telling the kid this. And, most of my patients endured these situations, in round numbers for 1,000 weeks. So they deserve, to give themselves even more credit. And if you can internalize that belief in yourself, if you can internalize the idea that, you know what, I did a really difficult thing. I showed what, frankly, was a heroic level of perseverance by dealing with this situation as well as I did. And you can start to flip that self-image into a justifiably, legitimately positive view of yourself. I mean, nobody, this happens all the time with my patients. Nobody in the family was actively trying to make you feel bad about yourself. It was just the situation. And this took me a while to learn as a young practitioner, those situations, even when people are, not trying to cause harm, they can have a very similar long-term impact on people to others who were actively mistreated. The level of impact can be quite similar. And the treatment for it, starting with this rebuilding of the self-esteem, works well for everybody. It's a great foundation for making changes in the rest of your world, removing or at least putting boundaries around toxic relationships, for example, being able to get connected with some emotions that maybe have been repressed, which you mentioned at the beginning of the program. Being able as a person who feels good about themselves to say, you know what, these things that I've repressed, they don't deserve to be repressed. I have the right as a um, person who came through a difficult situation to put these things out there, to feel them, to write about them, to speak about them. And the more people do that, the more they are turning emotions into words, the less those emotions need to express themselves into the body in the form of symptoms.
Absolutely. How do you how do you separate your work from personal life as far as I'm just thinking about burnout. I'm not saying you have burnout, but just for let's say the average person that they go to work Monday to Friday or whatever the dates and times are, and they sometimes bring relationships, conversations that happen in the workplace home. What would be some of your guidance on those situations?
Yeah, many of my patients who came from challenging home situations, when they were kids, they don't have too many options for how to deal with that. And the reason I'm getting into this is that it has a direct impact on what happens in the workplace for adults. Because when kids are in these difficult environments, one of the ways they can react to it is to try to be the best little kids they can be. They work really hard, they pay attention to details, they try to be perfect, they try to focus on the needs of everybody else in that home environment. They tend to neglect themselves. They're not really taking time that a kid should to just be a kid and play and have joy and those things. They're too focused on the problems in the household or too focused on proving themselves. And so as adults, they do the same thing. And they're great in the workplace. I mean, they're working hard. They're paying attention to details. They're empathetic towards everybody else in their environment. They're very good team players. And they just go and go and go. And then when they get home, they do the same thing. They're trying to take care of the needs of everybody in their household or their neighbors or their social groups. And they tend to leave themselves out. They're not putting themselves on the list of people they're taking care of. And nobody can do that indefinitely. Sooner or later, your body is going to protest. So, what I try to do to help people with this is, again, number one, have some belief in yourself, have some respect for how much you overcame as a kid. Because if once you have that foundation of respect, then it means, you know what? You deserve to be on the list of people you take care of. You deserve to tell the rest of the world to say, you know what? I'm putting you guys on the shelf. I am going to do something for myself on a regular basis, ideally several hours a week if you can swing it, where I'm going to find activities, trial and error, whatever it takes to find activities that have no purpose but my own joy. And once people have that in their life, it's an essential human skill to have that in your life. And once they do, then that's a skill they will have for the rest of their lives. And it brings the stress level way, way down. And whenever the stress level gets too high in the future, they've now got something that they can do. Myself, I used to play soccer on up to three teams at a time. I was a bit of a nut about it, but after being nice and kind and compassionate to my patients all week, it was great to get out there and kick something. And that was my personal stress reduction. Um, None of the people on the team would talk about their work. We'd just talk about everything else, and we'd go out for a beer afterwards. It was just a great experience, and um, really set me up to have a good rest of the week.
Wow. Can you, as we're closing down our time, before we get to the end and do all your plugs for how people, because we always want to make sure that our guests are able to share all those. Uh, can you share how you're never too old to accomplish or dream or to do something because of that plasticity in our brain?
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, your podcast is a great example. I think a well-lived life is a journey where you are trying to find a good match between what you're good at, what you love, and what the world needs. And that journey and that search just keeps on going. You can tell I'm getting on in years, but I'm still doing that. And in fact, if anything, doing more. So it's something that anybody can do, but they will do it better when they have a solid core understanding of their own value. And then it becomes a question of trial and error. That whole process of finding an activity that provides your own joy, that's trial and error. Most of my patients, they weren't quite sure what they were going to do that was going to give them joy when they first started out. And it took them months to learn how, but that's okay. It's a learning process.
Great. Well, we're getting towards the end, and would love to have you share all the ways people can learn about you, how they can get a hold of your books, and all the things that you've done that supports what work you do, and uh, it's just been an honor to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, symptomatic.me is the website for the ATNS. It's a lot easier to remember than the name of the nonprofit. And we've got, tons of resources there, the self-assessment quiz. People who support us by becoming dues-paying members, they are helping us teach medical professionals, mental health professionals, and the public so that everybody who can benefit from these concepts will get the quality of care that they deserve. We have an annual conference. We recommend a series of evidence-based books and apps that can help people. We've got videos. We have my podcast, which is called The Story Behind the Symptoms, where I interview patients, very much like I used to do in my practice, to uncover the reasons why they're ill and what it takes to get better. And we've got monthly Q&As, a webinar where people can type in questions that they have about this. And those are for members, but every 3 months we do one that's open to everybody. The next one will probably be in February sometime. So lots of hope in this, even for people who've been ill and looking for answers for a very long time. We can help.
Wow. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing so many of those the stories and experiences because I'm a more visual individual and just imagining those conversations and coming and let's say curing, but helping somebody that's uh, been going through just not great times and having that, oh wow, this is something a little bit new, but it's helping, and you're not just helping yourself, you're helping them, and then you're also helping your peers and the larger community. And just it's so happy that we were able to connect and get our schedules aligned. 'Cause uh, it, we'd be missing out. The world would be missing out if we didn't have you on to share. So we want to say again, big thank you to you and to your team for getting this set up, and we look forward to getting this out to our viewers and our listeners as soon as possible. So here with the holidays coming. Very rapidly, may be able to help a few people, if not more, as they start to unpack some of those situations and potentially traumas that they've been holding on to for years. So the holidays aren't as stressful as they uh, could maybe have been for many years.
Yeah, many people find the holidays stressful because they're spending time with people who create difficulties for them. And these are ideas that can help set boundaries around those people so that they're not quite so toxic.
Absolutely. I want to thank you, our viewers, our listeners, wherever you're at, whether you're in the United States, Africa, Asia, Oceania, Europe, Antarctica, Greenland. It's truly a blessing to have an opportunity to have our show and our guest today, Dr. David Clarke, with us and being so generous with his time and his knowledge experiences and just wanting to help fellow human beings. And so until we see you on our next show, we hope that you are celebrating the voices of yourself and others. And when you're able to, you can be a voice for you or somebody in need. Thank you so much, David, and thank you to our viewers and our listeners. And we'll see you on the next
Mhm.
show.
Thank you.